It's funny, isn't it, how certain places just stick with you. Not in a good way, like a splinter deep under the skin. Always there, always aching. For me, that place is St. Jude's. Not the saint, mind you, but the hospital. I was 19 when I first walked through those automatic doors. A bag slung over my shoulder, a freshly minted EMT certificate in my hand, and a naive grin plastered on my face. 19, ready to save the world, or at least the little corner of it that bled and broke. My name's Alex Miller, and I remember every single detail of that first day, right down to the sickly sweet smell of disinfectant mixed with something else. Something I couldn't quite place then. Something metallic, like old pennies, but sharper. It was the smell of sickness, of fear, of something else that St. Jude's held within its concrete walls. Most hospitals hum with a kind of sterile efficiency, a detached professionalism. St. Jude's was different. It had a heartbeat, a slow, irregular thump that felt less like life and more like a decaying organism. I was assigned to the night shift. Not just any night shift, mind you, but the deep night, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The graveyard shift, they called it. Perfect for a newbie, the old-timers said, because nothing ever happens after midnight. They'd chuckle, wink, and then leave me alone in the echoing corridors, the only sound the distant beep of machines and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilation system. They were wrong. So incredibly wrong. Everything happened after midnight at St. Jude's. My first few weeks were a blur of minor incidents, an elderly patient wandering off, a confused drunk in the waiting room, the occasional sprained ankle or late-night stomach flu. Routine, boring even. I spent most of my shifts patrolling, checking on patients, making sure the nurses had everything they needed, and trying to look busy so I wouldn't fall asleep. The hospital was a labyrinth, long, featureless hallways that all looked the same, leading to rooms marked by peeling paint and numbers that seemed to shift in the dim light. I learned to navigate by the faint, distinctive smells, the chemical tang of the lab, the stale coffee aroma from the staff lounge, the cloying sweetness of the pediatric ward, and always that underlining metallic scent that never seemed to fade. It was during my third week on a particularly quiet Tuesday night when things started to feel off. I was doing my rounds on the fourth floor, the long-term care wing. Most of the patients there were elderly, often sedated, their rooms dark, only the faint glow of monitors marking their existence. I remember the air being particularly heavy that night, thick with a stillness that felt unnatural. As I passed room 412, I heard it, a whisper. Not a distinct word, just a soft, drawn-out sound, like someone sighing right next to my ear. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart jumping. I looked around. Nothing. The corridor was empty, save for the faint emergency lights overhead. I told myself it was my imagination, the sleep deprivation finally getting to me. I was 19, remember? Full of bravado, eager to prove myself. I pushed the door to 412 open slowly. The room was dark, save for the pale green glow of a heart monitor beside the bed. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet old lady with severe dementia, lay sleeping soundly. Her breathing was shallow, even. There was no one else there. I checked the bathroom, the closet, empty. I shrugged it off, closed the door, and continued my rounds, though the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. The whispers continued. Not every night, but frequently enough to make me dread those late-night patrols. Sometimes it was just a sigh. Other times it sounded like a faint, guttural hum. Always in the long-term care wing. Always when I was alone. I tried to pinpoint the source, but it was like chasing a phantom. The sound would drift, seeming to come from one room, then another, then vanishing entirely the moment I got close. I started to carry a flashlight, even though the hallways were lit, just for the comfort of its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. One night, the whispers turned into something more distinct. I was passing room 408, the room of a man named Mr. Thompson. He was comatose, had been for months, sustained by machines. As I walked by, I heard his name, my name, Alex. It was a raspy, ancient voice, like dry leaves scraping concrete. I froze, my hand clutching the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. It had come from inside Mr. Thompson's room. I stood there for a long minute, debating. My training kicked in, check the patient, make sure everything's all right. But another part of me, a primal, terrified part, screamed to run. I chose my training. I pushed the door open, slowly, cautiously. The room was just as before. Mr. Thompson, frail and still, hooked up to his life support. The monitors beeped softly, rhythmically. No one else was there. His eyes were closed, his face slack. Yet, as I stood there, looking at him, I heard it again. Closer this time. Alex. It seemed to come from the very air around me, from the walls themselves. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran, not walked, down the corridor, not caring if a nurse saw me. I burst into the break room, gasping for air, leaning against the cold vending machine. My colleague, Brenda, a night nurse with eyes that had seen too much, looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Everything all right, rookie?" she asked, her voice calm, almost bored. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, my voice shaking. I heard something, a voice. It said my name, in Mr. Thompson's room, but he's comatose. Brenda put down her pen. She didn't laugh, didn't roll her eyes. Her expression was strangely neutral. "The hospital's old, Alex," she said, her voice low. "Pre-war. A lot of people have passed through these halls. A lot of lives ended here." She paused, then picked up her pen again. "You hear things, especially at night. It's just the old building settling." Her explanation was too quick, too dismissive. It didn't sit right with me. I knew what I heard. It wasn't the building settling. It was too clear, too deliberate. The way she said a lot of lives ended here also sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off, convince myself she was right, that my mind was playing tricks. But the metallic smell seemed stronger that night, clinging to my clothes, to my skin. I couldn't escape it. The next few nights were a blur of heightened anxiety. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. I avoided the fourth floor as much as I could, making excuses to the nurses about needing to be elsewhere. But St. Jude's had a way of pulling you back in, of making you confront what you feared. The hospital was understaffed, always. Eventually, my duties pulled me back to the long-term care wing. It was a Wednesday, late, maybe 3 a.m. A call came in from room 404. Mrs. Davies, another elderly patient, had activated her call light. I trudged down the corridor, my flashlight beam cutting a lonely path through the gloom. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The door to 404, which was always kept ajar for easy access, was completely closed. And not just closed, but it looked different, darker, like the wood itself had absorbed the shadows. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My gut screamed at me to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But Mrs. Davies was old and frail. What if she needed help? I took a deep breath, clenched my jaw, and pushed the door open.
The room was bathed in an eerie, dim light, not from the usual bedside lamp, but from somewhere inside the room itself, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Mrs. Davies was sitting bolt upright in her bed, which was strange because she was usually too weak to even lift her head without assistance. Her eyes were wide, staring at the far wall, and then I saw it. Standing in the corner, shrouded in the deepest part of the shadow, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in what looked like an old, stained patient gown. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and I couldn't make out any features, just the impression of a sunken face, two dark voids where eyes should be. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching Mrs. Davies. And then, slowly, its head turned. It turned to me. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor. The figure seemed to lean forward, almost imperceptibly, and a low, guttural growl, not human, not animal, but something else entirely, vibrated through the air, shaking the very bones in my body. The metallic smell intensified, making my eyes water, burning my nostrils. Mrs. Davies let out a small, terrified whimper. The sound seemed to snap me out of my trance. My mind screamed at me to help her, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was stare at the horrifying silhouette in the corner of the room. It was then I noticed something else. Something on the floor, just beneath the figure. A dark, spreading stain, the color of rust. It pulsed faintly, like a slow, dying heart. Then the lights in the room flickered, once, twice, and went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. The darkness swallowed everything, thick and absolute. The air, already heavy with that metallic tang, felt like it was pressing in on me, stealing my breath. My heart was a frantic drum solo against my ribs. I could hear Mrs. Davies whimpering, a small, choked sound that seemed to come from far away. And then, that growl. It was closer now, not just vibrating in the air, but feeling like it was rattling inside my own skull. "Mrs. Davies," I finally managed to croak out, my voice a pathetic whisper. I fumbled in the dark, my hand slapping against the wall, desperately searching for the light switch. My fingers found it, flicked it up. Nothing. Dead. The emergency lights in the hallway outside were still on, casting a faint, sickly glow under the door. But inside room 404, it was pitch black. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. I could smell it now, too, distinct from the hospital's usual odors, a sweet, coppery smell that made my stomach churn. It was the smell of fresh blood, the spreading stain I'd seen on the floor. A low, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the linoleum, started from the corner where the figure had been. It was slow, deliberate, scraping closer. I took an involuntary step back, bumping into something hard and metallic. The IV stand. It clattered, a loud, jarring noise in the suffocating silence. The dragging stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. It stretched, taut and suffocating, making my ears ring. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, to see anything in the impenetrable dark. My eyes, no matter how hard I squinted, could make out nothing. Then, a faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip started. It was coming from right in front of me. Cold, liquid dread washed over me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, what that sound was. And then, a drop landed on my hand. Warm, viscous. I knew without looking. "Alex?" The voice was a ragged gasp right beside my ear. Mrs. Davies. But it wasn't her usual frail voice. It was thin, reedy, full of an unbearable terror. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, falling hard against the doorframe. The impact knocked the wind out of me. As I lay there, gasping, I heard it again, this time from directly over Mrs. Davies' bed. A wet, tearing sound, followed by a sickening thump, and then silence. A silence so profound, so utterly devoid of life, that it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to run, to leave this place and never look back. But my training, that damned ingrained sense of duty, wrestled with the terror. Mrs. Davies, was she okay? I had to check. I had to know. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling so violently I thought they'd give out. My hand, still slick with that dreadful warmth, found the doorknob. I yanked it open, stumbling out into the relatively brighter hallway, gasping in lungfuls of air. My flashlight, thank God, was still clutched in my other hand. With a shaking thumb, I clicked it on. The beam cut through the semi-darkness, illuminating the corridor. I spun around, my heart pounding, and shone it back into room 404. What I saw will be etched into my mind until the day I die. Mrs. Davies was still in her bed, or what was left of her. Her body was contorted at an impossible angle, limbs twisted, and her eyes were still wide open, fixed on the ceiling, but they were empty. And on the floor, next to the bed, was the figure. It was bent over something, hunched, and in the beam of my flashlight, I could finally make out some horrifying details. It wasn't wearing an old patient gown. It was the gown, or rather, the gown seemed to be part of it, clinging to its skeletal frame. Its skin, if you could call it that, was like dried parchment, stretched taut over sharp angles. Its head was tilted, but it was because its neck looked like it had been broken and healed wrong, leaving a grotesque bulge. And its face, there were no eyes, just deep, hollow sockets, blacker than the shadows. Its mouth was a gaping maw, stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth, some stained a dark, rusty red. It lifted its head slowly, incredibly slowly, its hollow gaze fixing on me. And then it smiled, a wide, silent, predatory smile that revealed even more of those horrific teeth. The metallic smell in the room intensified, almost choking me. I screamed, a raw, guttural scream that tore from my throat. It didn't sound human. I turned and ran, blindly, down the corridor, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly, reflecting off the shiny floor and sterile walls like a deranged disco ball. I ran past nurses' stations, past empty waiting areas, past the closed doors of other patients, not caring who heard me, not caring about anything but putting as much distance as possible between that thing. I slammed through the double doors leading to the emergency stairwell, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I stumbled down the concrete steps, 3 at a time, until I reached the ground floor. I burst through the exit doors, out into the cool night air, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I didn't stop until I was halfway across the parking lot, leaning against my beat-up sedan, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A hallucination? Sleep deprivation? A prank? No, it was too real. The smell, the coldness of the drip on my hand, Mrs. Davies' whimpers, her condition. It was all too horribly real. I called 911 from my phone, my fingers fumbling with the keys. There's been an incident," I stammered, my voice still hoarse with terror. "At St. Jude's Hospital, 4th floor, room 404. I think Mrs. Davies is... I don't know what it was. Something terrible happened." The operator's voice was calm, efficient, a stark contrast to my unraveling state. "Sir, can you please tell me your name and position?" "Alex Miller, EMT. I was on duty." "Okay, Alex, we're dispatching units now. Please stay where you are." I stayed where I was, leaning against my car, shivering in the humid night air, watching the hospital building. It stood there, a dark, imposing structure against the city lights, its windows like empty eyesores. I saw a few lights come on the 4th floor, then more. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The calm efficiency of the outside world was arriving, but I knew, deep down, that they wouldn't understand. They would find Mrs. Davies, they would find the scene, but they wouldn't find it. It was a creature of the shadows, a horror that belonged to the deep, silent hours of St. Jude's. When the police cars and ambulances arrived, lights flashing, a flurry of activity erupted. I was questioned endlessly. I told them what I had seen, omitting the parts I knew they wouldn't believe, focusing on the discovery of Mrs. Davies. I talked about her condition, the strange circumstances, the power outage in the room. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They asked if I was on any medication, if I was tired, if I had perhaps hallucinated due to stress. I denied everything. I knew what I saw. They found Mrs. Davies, of course. Her death was ruled unusual. They couldn't explain the cause of death. No obvious trauma that would explain the severity of her injuries. No signs of forced entry. Just devastation. They sealed off room 404. An investigation began. I was told to go home, to take a few days off, to get some rest. I went home, but rest didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow black sockets, that grotesque smile, the spreading stain on the floor. The metallic smell clung to me, no matter how many times I showered. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't just been in the hospital. It was in my head, a parasitic fear, growing stronger with every passing hour.
I tried to talk to Brenda, the night nurse, about it a few days later. I called her, my voice strained. "Brenda, about that night, about Mr. Thompson's room, you knew, didn't you, about things happening there?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice, low and weary. "Alex, you're new here. St. Jude's, it takes a piece of everyone who works there. Some more than others." She sighed. "Just try to forget it, kid. For your own sanity." Forget it? How could I forget it? It wasn't just a bad dream. It was real, and it was waiting in the shadows of St. Jude's. I knew I couldn't go back, not to that hospital, not ever again. Or so I thought. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and waking nightmares. Every shadow seemed to hold that gaunt, skeletal figure. Every creak of my old apartment building sounded like that dragging, wet scrape across the floor. The metallic smell, that coppery tang of fear and blood, was constantly in my nostrils, a phantom scent that wouldn't leave me alone, no matter how many times I scrubbed my skin raw in the shower. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My family tried to help, but how do you explain something that defies all logic, all reason?
They just saw a traumatized young man burning out after a difficult first few weeks on the job. I quit my EMT position. I told them it wasn't for me, that the pressure was too much. They understood, or at least they pretended to. But the truth was, I couldn't face another night, another dimly lit corridor, knowing what lurked in the spaces between the light and the dark. St. Jude's had branded me, marked me with a fear so profound it had eaten away at my very core. I spent my days trying to distract myself. Long walks, binge watching bad TV, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to that horrifying night. But it was always there, lurking. And then the dreams started. Not just nightmares, but incredibly vivid, almost lucid dreams of St. Jude's. I'd be back in room 404, the darkness pressing in, the growl vibrating through my bones. Sometimes I'd see other patients, their faces contorted in silent screams as the figure loomed over them. The dreams always ended with me waking up in a cold sweat, screaming, my own voice echoing in the silence of my room. One morning, after a particularly brutal night of dreams, I found myself inexplicably drawn to my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my fingers typed St. Jude's Hospital into the search bar. I scrolled through the usual administrative pages, the About Us section, the visitor information. Then something caught my eye. A local forum, a dusty, old-school message board dedicated to urban legends and local history. A thread titled The Shadows of St. Jude's. My heart hammered. I clicked on it. The posts were old, some dating back years, even decades. They were from former patients, nurses, even janitors. They talked about strange whispers, cold spots, flickering lights, the feeling of being watched. One post from an anonymous user chilled me to the bone. Room 404. Avoid it. Something lingers there. It takes a piece of you. Another post from someone claiming to be a former night nurse mentioned a persistent metallic smell, like old blood, that no amount of cleaning could ever remove, especially in the older wings. They spoke of the unusual number of unexplained deaths in the long-term care unit, patients who just faded, often with no clear medical cause. The official reports always listed things like cardiac arrest or respiratory failure, but the nurses knew. They just knew. It wasn't just me. Other people had seen, or at least sensed, something wrong with St. Jude's. It validated my experience, but it also terrified me. It meant I wasn't going crazy, but it also meant it was real, and it was still there. The more I read, the more a strange, morbid curiosity took hold. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, even though I knew it would burn me. I started visiting the hospital again, not going inside, of course, just driving past it, slowly, late at night. I'd park down the street and just watch the building. It was a massive, imposing structure, built in the early 1900s, with dark brick and too many windows that looked like empty eyes. Even from a distance, I could feel its oppressive weight, its silent hum of ancient secrets. One night, as I sat in my car staring at the hospital, I saw something. A faint reddish glow coming from one of the windows on the 4th floor. Room 404. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a flickering light, but a steady, pulsing luminescence, like a dim ember. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt compelled. It was a terrifying, irresistible pull. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. Maybe it was the need for answers. Maybe it was the twisted curiosity that had been ignited by those forum posts. Or maybe just maybe, St. Jude's wasn't done with me yet. The next night, I found myself standing outside the hospital's employee entrance. It was 2 a.m. The city was asleep, save for the distant drone of traffic. I had dressed in dark clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. I knew the security codes, the routines. I knew the blind spots of the cameras, the times when the night security guard did his rounds. It was stupid, reckless, suicidal, but I had to. My heart hammered as I slipped through the back door, using an old key card I'd conveniently forgotten to turn in. The air inside was heavy, just as I remembered, thick with the smell of disinfectant and that ever-present metallic tang. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows down the familiar corridors. Every sound seemed amplified. The distant hum of machinery, the soft gurgle of the pipes, the faint echo of my own footsteps. I moved like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, my old flashlight clutched in my hand. I avoided the main areas, making my way through service corridors and disused stairwells. My destination was the 4th floor, room 404. As I ascended the stairs, the air grew colder, heavy with that sense of dread. The metallic smell became almost overwhelming, burning my nostrils, making my eyes water. When I finally emerged onto the 4th floor, the silence was absolute. No distant beeping of monitors, no nurse's quiet footsteps, just a profound, suffocating stillness. I walked slowly down the corridor, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path. The numbers on the door seemed to loom out of the darkness. 401, 402, 403, and then 404. The door was closed, just as it had been that terrifying night. No faint light under it, no pulsing glow, just a dark, ominous slab of wood. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers hovering over the doorknob. It was cold, colder than it should have been. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm my frantic heart. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that opening this door again was a mistake, a fatal mistake. But I couldn't stop myself. It was like I was being pulled by an invisible string, an unseen force compelling me forward. My hand closed around the knob. It was ice cold. I twisted it. It turned with a soft, ominous click. I pushed the door open, slowly, just a crack at first. The room inside was pitch black. No emergency lights, no faint glow, just an abyss. The metallic smell was overpowering now, almost tangible, making me gag. I shone my flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing the familiar contours of the room. The empty bed where Mrs. Davies had been, the IV stand in the corner. Nothing out of place. No grotesque figure, no spreading stain. Just a normal, empty hospital room. A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I must have imagined it. The stress, the sleep deprivation, it was all in my head. I took another step inside, the flashlight beam sweeping across the walls, the ceiling. Nothing, just an old, empty room. Then the door behind me slammed shut with a thunderous bang that echoed through the silent hospital. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. I tried the doorknob. It was locked, trapped. And from the darkness in the corner of the room, a low, guttural growl started. Closer this time, right behind me. The growl was a physical presence, vibrating through the floorboards, through the very air. It was no longer a distant echo, but a living, breathing sound, hot on my neck. My flashlight beam, still clutched in my trembling hand, darted wildly, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness that had swallowed the room. But the light seemed to shrink, absorbed by the shadows, making them even deeper, even more impenetrable. Panic seized me, raw and absolute. I scrambled backward, tripping over something I couldn't see, falling hard onto the cold linoleum floor. The flashlight flew from my grasp, clattering somewhere in the darkness, its beam extinguished with a final sickening flicker. Now it was truly dark, and I was truly alone. The growl intensified, closer now, accompanied by a low, wet, snuffling sound. I could feel its breath, foul and ancient, on my face. The metallic smell was so potent it tasted like blood in my mouth. I tried to scream, but my throat was constricted, no sound escaping, just a desperate, choked gasp. I curled into a fetal position, my arms instinctively wrapping around my head, trying to shield myself from the inevitable. My mind raced, flashing through memories of Mrs. Davies, of the other whispers, of the forum posts. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't stress. This was real, and it was here, with me, in this sealed, lightless room. Then I felt it, a cold, skeletal touch on my ankle. It was slender, almost delicate, but undeniably strong. It wrapped around my leg, pulling. I let out a strangled cry, kicking wildly, trying to dislodge it, but the grip tightened, incredibly powerful. I was being dragged, slowly at first, then faster, across the cold floor. The scraping sound was deafening in the darkness, a horrifying symphony of my terror. I fought, clawed at the air, tried to find something to grab onto, but there was nothing, just the unrelenting pull of that cold, skeletal grip. My head hit something hard, wood. I tasted blood, hot and salty, in my mouth. The dragging stopped. I lay there, disoriented, my body aching, my mind a swirling vortex of fear and pain. A faint light, red and pulsing, began to emanate from somewhere above me. It was the same sinister glow I had seen from the parking lot, but infinitely more terrifying up close. It cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the empty room seem to writhe and contort. In that dim, hellish light, I saw it. It was standing over me, impossibly tall, its skeletal frame draped in that tattered, blood-stained gown. Its head was still tilted at that grotesque angle, and its hollow eye sockets were fixed on me, black pits of infinite darkness. And that smile, it was wider now, revealing more of those needle-like teeth, some still glistening with a dark, wet sheen. It wasn't just observing me, it was feeding, or perhaps savoring. I could feel a strange, draining sensation, like my very life force was being siphoned away. A profound weakness spread through my limbs. My head swam. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I was paralyzed, utterly at its mercy. It slowly, deliberately lowered its head towards me. I could smell its breath now, a putrid mix of decay, metal, and something else, something indescribably ancient and evil. Its gaping maw opened wider, wider than anything humanly possible, and I could see deep within a swirling vortex of blackness, punctuated by those rows of wicked teeth. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end, for the ultimate, unspeakable horror. I felt a piercing pain in my chest, like a cold, sharp blade being driven into my heart. A scream tore through me, not just from my throat, but from the depths of my very being. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The pressure on my chest vanished. The cold, draining sensation ceased. I opened my eyes, cautiously. The room was still dark, but the pulsing red glow was gone. The metallic smell was still there, but fainter. And the creature? It was gone, vanished. The room was empty, just as it had been when I first opened the door. My body was trembling uncontrollably, my muscles screaming in protest. I pushed myself up, slowly, painfully, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Was I alive? Was this real? I stumbled towards the door, my hands frantically searching for the knob. It was still locked. Panic began to bubble up again, but then I remembered the key card. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers shaking, and pulled it out. With a desperate swipe, the lock clicked open. I burst out into the hallway, gasping for air, leaning against the cold wall, my legs threatening to give out. The emergency lights in the corridor seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of room 404. I ran, not caring where, just away, down the stairs, through the back exit, and into the cool, blessed night air. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. I was alive, but I was changed, permanently. I never went back to St. Jude's. Not physically, but in my mind, I'm still there, trapped in that dark room, feeling that skeletal touch, seeing those hollow eyes. I still wake up screaming sometimes, covered in a cold sweat, the phantom smell of blood in my nose. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. All I know is that St. Jude's isn't just a hospital. It's a tomb, a prison, a feeding ground for something ancient and malevolent that lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. It took something from me that night, a piece of my sanity, a piece of my soul. I can feel its absence, a hollow ache where my innocence used to be. And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the moon hangs low in the sky, I swear I can still hear the faint drip, drip, drip echoing in the silence. And I wonder if I ever truly escaped St. Jude's, or if a part of me, a part of my terror, remains forever trapped within its cursed walls.